If you were taking HRM's Metro Transit in 2011, you would have seen the provocative ads on bus shelters sponsored by Stepping Stone, a charitable non-profit organization that serves and advocates for sex workers. Established in 1987, Stepping Stone is the only organization in the Maritimes that deals specifically with street life and sex work from a harm reduction model, and its offices and drop-in center are located in a modest, non-residential house in Halifax, where many of its staff members are former sex workers. Responding to the lack of public outcry to the violence faced by sex trade workers, including the murder and attempted murder of 2 women in the trade, one who was murdered in summer 2010, but whose body has not yet been found as of November 2012, and the other whose attack was amended to aggravated assault instead of attempted murder, Stepping Stone launched a public awareness campaign to show that sex trade workers are just like anyone else. They are daughters, mothers, brothers, and sisters. Prostitutes as a whole are marginalized in society, and too often the public feel little sympathy for their plight. The purpose of the ad campaign was to make sex trade workers familiar, literally family-like, to the public, and in so doing also appropriate words such as tramp, hooker, and prostitute, and take away their derogatory meaning. As Renee Ross, the executive director of Stepping Stone, stated, "We did want to get people's attention, and we really wanted folks to see sex workers for what they are, and that is people, and to get people talking about the issue, because the reality is sex workers are criminalized in Canada, and they face a great amount of stigma, marginalization, and violence." Here is what the ads look like. "I'm proud of my tramp raising 2 kids on her own. Sex workers are daughters too. At my wedding, my younger hooker gave the funniest speech. Sex workers are brothers too. I'm glad my prostitute made me finish school. Sex workers are mothers too." Interestingly, when the campaign was being drawn up, Extreme Group, the ad agency which created the ads for free, could not find local actors willing to volunteer their faces for the ads. Renee Ross argued that it was because these actors did not want to face the stigma of being associated with prostitution. Ross's own grandmother ended up being one of the 3 faces in the ads, along with 2 employees from Extreme Group. What accounts for the stigmatization of prostitutes in society? What is it about selling and buying sex for money that makes it particularly appalling for many in society? We talked about pornography last week, and although many of us may admit to have watched porn at some point in our lives, I believe few of us, if any, have ever engaged in porn. It would be the same for prostitution. Any type of sex work is far from the mainstream. As we discussed earlier, pornography and prostitution were the primary sites of the feminist sex wars of the 1980s, dividing radical feminists and sex radical or sex positive feminists. Interestingly, Nussbaum, who opposes pornography, takes a pro-prostitution stance. What is the basis of her stance, and how would we compare it to that of Christine Overall, who takes an anti-prostitution stance? Both political philosophers attempt to go beyond the feminist sex wars to recognize that not only can sex work be dangerous, demeaning, and exploitative, but that sex workers have been empowered, demanding to speak for themselves and what they do and why they do it. Certainly, this became clear when the case brought by 3 sex workers led to the landmark ruling by Ontario Supreme Court Justice Susan Himmel in September 2010, which struck down Canada's prostitution laws. Should prostitution be criminalized or decriminalized? Should it be legalized and regulated? Should the actions of buyers be criminalized but not that of sellers? Is prostitution about sex work or exploitation? Or to use a play on words to bring up a stark comparison, sexploitation? Why is prostitution stigmatized? Why is it important that we reflect on our own attitudes about prostitution? What are the moral objections to prostitution? These are the sorts of questions that we will be addressing in this module. I've asked you to read a chapter in your Nussbaum text as well as an article by Christine Overall. They help to illustrate the 2 sides of the prostitution debate. I have 4 primary goals in this module. First, I want you to reflect on why prostitution is stigmatized in society. What is it about sex work that makes it particularly appalling to most people in society? As the Canadian government argued in the courts, prostitution should not be encouraged as a career choice for young women. Why not? Second, I want you to consider why Nussbaum opposes pornography, but not prostitution. How do we make sense of Nussbaum's pro-prostitution but anti-pornography stance, seeing that these two issues together constitute the divide in the feminist sex wars? Third, I want to introduce you to the sorts of moral objections raised by anti-prostitution feminists like Overall in their stance against prostitution. Fourth, I want to discuss the Canadian case. How does it fit in the larger global context? What kinds of legal regimes surround prostitution? Why did Justice Susan Himmel strike down Canada's prostitution laws in her landmark ruling? I do not expect us to settle the debates around prostitution. However, there have been attempts to differentiate between taking a stance against prostitution and taking a stance against prostitutes. I co-directed a 5-year project on sex trade in the Philippines where one of the Filipino non-governmental organizations embraced exactly this distinction and made it their motto. We hate prostitution, but we love the women. I recommended a chapter from my co-authored book, Reluctant Bedfellows, Feminism, Activism, and Prostitution in the Philippines, for this module. I have struggled with the philosophical issues around prostitution in my own work, so I know that there are no easy answers. I look forward to your reflections this week on whether prostitution can ever be an accepted form of work in today's society.